I'll practice it.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to this exciting episode of Photoshop Party. We are lucky today to have Sherry Hammond on board to talk about making mats and making magic. And I notice this is the biggest crowd we've had in I don't know how long. So I'm not going to take it personal that everybody joins just for Sherry or Dennis or the superstars, but it's okay. Don't feel bad about me. Anyway, Sherry is an artiste. She is one of the few people that has the degree for master artist. And what was the original where you did the retouching for your?
That was the original master artist.
And now they have the new master artist.
And then the MEI, which they discontinued the name and they went back to master artist, but it's the red ribbon instead of the white one.
She's got all those ribbons, so I'm not jealous though. Anyway, Sherry, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you're now, whoops, yeah, I'm recording, so we're okay. You're officially in charge.
Okay, so I can share my screen now.
Hopefully.
Okay. Okay. Can y'all see my image?
You betcha.
Okay. Let me move everybody's pretty little faces out of the way. Okay, I'm going to start with this particular image because it's easily accessible and I've got it all in layers so that I can show you without having to completely start over on something. I kind of came up with this. I know there's probably a million different ways to do these mats. This is just how I do them. And this is one that I entered in 2016. And I think it wasn't long before this that I started doing these mats. But I'm going to just turn some layers off. So I've got my overall background mat, and I've got my image here, and I'll be putting the image up because it kind of helps with the visual to show how it looks with the image there. So I'm going to throw away my matte layer, but this is what it looks like with the beveled mat. So I'm just going to throw it away and start new so you can see exactly what I'm doing. Like I said, there's probably, goodness knows how many different ways to do this. I like simple. I do simple. As far as where you're going to put your edges on your mat, you can get real technical and bring your guides down and measure so that you're exact. I've gotten pretty decent at eyeballing it. So I have my marquee tool, and I'm just going to make a selection. And then I'm going to inverse this, otherwise we're going to get a copy of that dark matte in the middle instead of where I want it to be a matte. So I'm going to go to select, inverse, and you can see now I've got the marching ants on the outside instead of selecting something in the middle. Does everybody see that? Okay, at this point, I'm going to do a Control J, which is going to make a copy of that selection. You can see it here in my layers palette. Right here. You can see there's a hole cut out in the middle. That's what we just did. Now we're going to go into all the layer properties so we can do all the bevel and emboss and the drop shadow and all that fun stuff that makes it look like a mat. So I'm going to double click on that layer and it brings up the layer styles. Has everybody used layer styles before in doing something like this?
Yes.
Yes.
The first thing I'm going to do is bevel and emboss. And there's a bunch of different options here, and I'm going to go through for this particular image. Now, don't get tied too tightly to all these numbers that we're going to use here in just a few minutes, because this is going to vary on the tonal values of your image, how light or how dark, or how big your file is. That's all going to affect these numbers. So it's going to take some playing around with depending on your image. So at least you know the basics, and then you can go and play with the sliders and the numbers after you have your selection. So for my bevel and emboss, I've got inner bevel. I'm going to have smooth, and I'm going to take my depth to 276, and then so you can see, whoops, you can just play around with it and see what ends up happening, and then you can start to see some stuff happening. Whoa, what's happening here?
You accidentally put 250 in your size one box down.
Ah, that's what happened. Okay, so 276. Click the wrong thing. Now I'm going to have the direction going up. You can play around with down. I just kind of always keep it in up. And my size is going to be somewhere around 18 to 20. Does everybody see what's happening when I change the size? And then when I go to soften, I've got to soften around 2. Does everybody see what's happening here? And the light, I'm going to move it around so you can see what it does. It's just like lighting a portrait, and that dot is your subject. You see how it's affecting the highlights and the shadows on the bevel part of the mat? I'm going to have mine somewhere in the range of 120.
Should it match the lighting on your image?
Yes, that's a very important question. It should usually match the lighting, but there's a lot of times, depending on the tonal value of the image, if it's, especially if it's a dark matte, I'm going to bring this light a lot closer to the dot, and it gives it a little bit of a flatter light on the matte. So the further away from your dot, the harder it's going to be on one side. See how it's lighter on the right and the bottom than it is on the top and the left? When you move that little cursor closer to the dot, it makes it a lot more even.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. A lot of people don't even know you can move it. So I like just slight amount one side more than the other, but if you've noticed in print competition, a lot of time the judges are looking at an image, and you can see the matte in two, either like one side and either the top or the bottom, and you can't on the other side. That's generally why this little angle of light is too far off to the side. So without a lot of other work, you're not going to see it on all 4 sides, especially if you don't do the drop shadow, which is part of this, and we'll get to that after we do the bevel and emboss. Now, generally, I don't like the opacity as bright as we have it. Oh yeah, and I always use global light, because without it, you can see how harsh it gets. So the highlight and the shadow for your bevel and emboss, it defaults to 75% for the highlight opacity and the shadow opacity. So I usually take these down quite a bit. so that they're not screaming at me. So see how you can still see it, but it's not super distracting. To me, the 75% where it defaults is just too much, and it's going to draw way too much attention. So can everybody see that okay? What happened when I changed that?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Now, and also you can change the color of your highlight and the color of your shadow, which is right here. I generally don't do that because I don't want any more distracting stuff happening, especially if this is for a competition print. We do this for fine art stuff, and sometimes for portraits, depending on what they're getting. I just leave them at white and black because you can really get distracting elements real quick by playing around with that. So now I'm going to go to the drop shadow. And I generally leave the distance and the spread on the default. And then the only thing I'm going to change is the size. Because if you change distance, it's just too much. It's too harsh. And spread, I have to have some distance first. And then spread is just not giving it what I want. So I am generally going to only play with the size. It softens and it nice feathered look. And then the opacity, you can look and see what you're doing. And then if you like it, you can soften it down to taste or more. Depends on how deep you want this cut matte look. I usually only have it at a lower opacity because I want just a hint, because you can see that there's separation, and the separation, well, I'll have to do it when I get it up here in the effects, and the separation really helps define the edge of your mat, especially if the lighting on your bevel is not quite right. And then I don't change any of the quality or anything like that. And you can also, in with this, the angle of light on the drop shadow, you can't change. So I just kind of keep it in that general direction because it's kind of matching everything else. Now, if I do change the lighting direction on the matte, I'll change the lighting direction on the drop shadow. But as you can see, with leaving distance and spread alone, and changing only the size, it kind of makes it even, which I like. It's less distracting. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now I'm going to turn off drop shadow so you can see what I mean about defining where the cut matte is. See, it just helps it look like it's a real cut matte that's off of the print a little bit with that little bit of a drop shadow. And then also, sometimes depending on the image, I'll add a drop shadow to the image too, very lightly. So it really gives it a little bit of a float mount feel. It doesn't work with everything. You can just play around with it. I happen to like it on this particular one, and I can't turn, there it goes. So that's pretty much it. Like I said, I like things simple and clean, and you can even go so far as to make another mat on top of this one to have it be a double mat. And sometimes that works, but for me, I like things a little more simple, a little more clean lines. And then sometimes I don't even do a mat. I'll do a keystroke instead of the cut matte look. So it just all depends on what you want to do. Anybody got any questions?
Yeah, Sherry.
Yep.
Yep. Can you zoom into a corner so we can see the detail? Great, thanks.
So if you were to do a second mat, just follow the same thing as you did on layer 2.
Yeah.
So just create a second one and then,
Oh, you do want me to do one?
sure, why not?
Okay.
Hey, Sherry, before you get started, is it creating its own layers every time you do that though? Every time you create a new one?
Okay, say that again.
Is it creating its own layers when you start doing another
Yes,
one?
see this is I'm turning the cut mat layer off, so it is a layer by
Right.
itself.
Okay,
She did a Command or Control J to
Control
bring
J,
up her
yeah.
selection when she selected the area for her mat.
So you want me to do a double one real quick?
Please.
Okay, so I'm going to do it on top of that cut layer that we just made, because if I do it on that background layer, you're not going to see it. It's going to be underneath. So I'm just going to do it on top of this one, and I'm going to give less space between the two. And then I'm going to inverse my selection so that it's a matte. Control J. See up here in the layers, it made me another one. And it's going to automatically copy all of my settings that I did for the layer effects. See, I didn't have to go back and do it again.
That's too easy.
Yeah, simple. I like simple.
Cool.
Jerry, this is John. You've been doing this for years, so you've got it down where you can eyeball it and get it so well, which is great. But for a lot of us beginners, is there a way of putting that marquee tool on there and having it measured so we don't have to eyeball it?
Yeah, that's what I was mentioning in the beginning. You can always, let me get out of this so you can see. Hit Control R, get your rulers, and then bring down a guide. And then on the edge, you can see where you are in your ruler, and do it that way. And then when you do your marquee tool, it snaps to it.
Great. Okay, so use the ruler. Thank you.
And then pull the guides out of the ruler.
Yeah, got it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And also, just you have to be on the move tool to be able to pull a guide out.
Oh, can you say that again? What have to be on what?
Pull a guide out of the ruler, you have to be on the move tool.
Oh, okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
In the newer versions, you can drag a guide out of there no matter what tool you're in, as long as you start on the ruler.
Cool.
Sherry, how did you select your color for your outside mat?
Just a color that's on the inside here. A lot of people could have gone with yellow, and if you remember my program from Idaho, I tend to go a little bit muted with the color that's already in there because I really wanted this storm to stand out. So complementary color wise, if I kept the matte blue, one of the blues that's in here, and pretty muted in saturation, that storm's the first thing that you're going to see. So that's why I chose that the color blue. I think I got it out of the water somewhere.
Do you have a texture on that blue mat?
Yes.
It's so beautiful.
Thank you.
Subtle.
It's actually a combination of a couple of textures. I've got tons of textures that I like to use, and I like soft textures. Textures can be tricky because I've seen a lot in print competition, and a lot of times a super textured mat will bring the score down on a competition image. So just enough to be nice and subtle, but not so much it's going to smack the judges over the head.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
They'll ask the questions when I turn the recording off.
Gary, why don't you show them real fast how to do a fine art like we do for comp? That's simple. I mean, a lot of people don't.
You mean
get-
just a key line?
Yeah, just keyline. One of the things that while Sherry's doing that is I see as a judge is I see these lines and these cut mats all out of proportion. And John brought it up about, doing the marquees and things. And I'm not trying to take away from Sherry's program while she's bringing all the stuff up, but what I'm trying to say is if you do these kind of things and do these kind of mats, make sure you have even tops and bottoms, because I know Dwight and I, when we judge, we see mats that have people got marquee lines and they got, twice as much on the top and the bottom. So Sherry's so good at, defining her edges, but I just want to bring that out to everybody.
I've got something weird on my image and I can't get rid of it. Okay. No. Okay, I'm just going to close it and reopen it. Oh, wait. Let me stop sharing for a second so I can look for this. And then feel free to talk amongst yourselves so I can get this back.
Sherry, do you want to offer them the guides, the information of that if they want to email you for that?
Sure. If you want to.
Okay, I'll type in the chat her email, and just going to go to everyone here. And if you want to email her, I'm sure she has a PDF.
And it's step by step, easy to follow. Even I can do it.
Sherry at artbysherry.net, right, Sherry?
Correct.
Okay, so if you email her, she'll send you the PDF of it. It's in the chat for everybody that wants to know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now I can go back to sharing the screen. I got my image back. I have no clue what was, whatever the heck that was. And we were talking earlier, and I'm going to take the drop shadow off the image because it'll look weird with the keystroke. And this is so easy. And I do it basically the same way. I decide the distance I want to be away from the image. And I know a lot of people that do it right on the image, and I'm not a huge fan of that. But I do like it offset. And then I will choose a color. I'm just going to choose one of this darker blue in the rock here. And then go to edit, stroke. And I'm going to tell it 4 to begin with. And this will also, your number will depend on how big or how small your file is, because the smaller the file, the bigger the number is going to make a really wide stroke. And then I'm going to do Control H to get rid of it, and then, or to hide it. And that's pretty much it. It's super simple.
Why don't you show them with guide, Sherry, for people who aren't so efficient with their marquee like you are, because I'm one of the guide type people.
Okay, got my ruler. And if you're not familiar with how to get the ruler, it's Control R. It brings up the ruler, without the ruler, with the ruler. Okay, I'm going to pull my guide out, and I'm going to do three dots. 1, 2, 3.
That's so technical, Sherry.
2, 3. What? 3 dots?
3 dots.
Well, at this point, it's hard to tell if they're 8ths or 16ths. So see, you have your guides. Whoops, this one's too far. I missed. So now you have your guides up. And when you do your marquee tool, it's really easy. It'll just, whoops, and it didn't do it, of course. Usually will snap right to your guides, and then there you go. And then you can do the stroke that way. Let's change it to 5 and see what happens. Control H, hide everything, and then there's using the guides instead of just eyeballing.
Gary, I noticed you use a stroke tool. I use the fill tool sometimes. Is that almost identical?
If I use the fill for that whole space inside that stroke line would be filled with that color.
Oh, okay.
See, here we go. Okay, edit, fill.
Oh, gotcha.
So to stroke, it just strokes your selection line.
Okay.
Is putting the stroke, like, I don't know what it was, like a quarter of an inch out from the actual image? Just a different method than putting it at the edge of the image? Is there a school of thought on one is better or worse or whatever? I've never done it that just like a quarter.
For me, I'll do it both ways and see which one I like better with the image. A lot of times it's just completely dependent on the image. If it's kind of a complicated image, like an abstract, I'm generally going to put just a stroke because the judges are already racking their brains with an abstract as it is. So with an abstract, I'm going to make the presentation as simple as possible.
Thank you.
And also personal preference.
One of the things I know Dwight and I see so often in judging is strokes too big or too wide and off color from anything in the scene. And so you want to give the judges anything else to complain about. So Sherry's brought up some very good points about simplicity and doing that, but I'm just pointing out some things that we see as judges so frequently as the strokes, colors, and too many. They put too many around. I've got one day I had 6. I counted around there. It's like, okay, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
And we've all done it. I used an example of one of my old competition images back from when I was in Georgia, probably 20 years ago, that had several borders and keystrokes. And it's like, I went nuts. And so it's kind of, like Dennis said, just because you can, doesn't mean you should. Any other questions?
Yeah, Sherry, why don't you explain your thoughts on how heavy the outside border should be, in proportion to your composition, or what works well for print competition type of image?
You mean how big the matte part is?
Yes, how heavy, Dennis was kind of mentioning sometimes there's not enough room for our eyes to look around, but give us your thoughts. You and Dennis have some pretty good ideas.
Well, this one was a printed image back before all the craziness started. And with a printed image, I'm going to make sure that my print is going to fit in the little trough that on the print turntable and not cover up the image. So I'm going to make sure I have enough matte that when that little thing comes up, because it covers up part of the matte, just a little snippet of it, but I don't want my matte to be so small that it's going to go into the image area, because I know a lot of people do thin mattes and then long skinny, and then when it sits in the trough, it's covering up part of the image, which to me is a huge detriment. So if I'm printing, I'm going to give it a little bit more matte just to make sure that it's going to work with the turntable. Now, digital, for the past couple of print competitions with district and IPC, I did a little bit of a smaller matte just because I didn't have to worry about that little bottom piece, the image being covered up by I don't even know what you call that thing that the
Well,
print,
it's like a print gutter. It holds
it's
the
like a
image in this
prop
way.
that it sits in. So with for me for digital, I just kind of went with a little bit less matte, and it seemed to work out pretty well. And then viewing it digitally for me, as opposed to viewing it on a print,
That photograph is
for
insane.
digital, for me, less matte, for whatever reason, psychological or otherwise, it seems to work better if you're viewing it on a monitor versus a print. And I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know. It just, for me, comp prints, if they're digital, just work better with a digital matte, at least in my opinion.
Could you address the challenges of light mats versus dark mats with an image, and how the judges perceive that, please?
Light matte versus dark matte's going to totally depend on the image. If you have a super high key image, then I would not use a dark matte because it creates too much contrast between the matte and the print. And it just totally depends on the image and the key of your image. And the same goes for brighter saturated colors. It totally depends on your image. Generally try to stay away from super saturated, bright colored mattes, because 9 times out of 10, it's going to be fighting for attention with your image.
Gary, once you have one made, can you save can you save the whole mat as a separate file or template to use later?
Yeah, you can. The only problem is if it's a textured one like this, unless all your images are going to be the same size and the same proportion, if you stretch it or smash it to fit, you're going to be able to see it in the texture. It can definitely work with a solid matte color with no problem.
When you add your texture in, are you using, I don't know how to describe it, dropping it on top of there and then going like overlay mode or whatever to make it fit into there?
You mean after you make the mat?
When you're making your texture on your mat.
Oh, I don't make it on the mat. I've already got backgrounds that
Okay.
have the texture on them, and then I just kind of grab them and change the color or the tone to match the image. So I've already got let's see, that in place. I mean, that's just the background mat. So for another image, I'll just use this mat and just change the color in how light or how dark, or how muted or how saturated.
She's not reinventing the wheel every time.
The wheel. Did that answer your question, Michael?
that one
Yeah.
question about a pre-made mat. If you had a white mat and you're doing a whole gallery of images, you could easily do that if you're doing all the same size. Like if you had them on white or one particular color like this, and you're dragging them all in the same size. And then if you put your guides into the center so you knew exactly where to put them every time. If you're doing a gallery and everything was the same size and same look, of course you'd want to simplify and do all that.
Yeah, I'm gonna smush my mat here so you can see what I'm talking about. It changes the dynamics of the texture. You can see in the mat, it kind of got stretched. I mean, if it's super subtle, it might not be noticeable. But if you're going to keep one to do another image and you want to save a template, I would definitely save it as a solid color and then just add the texture later. That way you can use it as a template to change it however you want it.
Why don't you explain the purpose of a mat?
The purpose of a mat, it polishes off your image. It's the final touch. It's kind of like the frame on a portrait. It says finished.
And I'm just going to inject real fast. It defines the area that you want the judges or the viewer to look at and corral their eye to look into that space. That's why when she does her mats, she does them so simple. But as a judge, we want to be able to, I mean, the biggest confidence is I didn't see the matting because all I could see is the photograph, because you want that mat or that presentation to corral the viewer or the judge's eye so that they know where to go.
Yeah, your presentation should enhance, not distract. And that's true if you're doing just fine art images, portraits, competition, anything.
I have a question for Dennis. You're saying using the same mat, like you were mentioning, like high key, white, or different images and everything, the same background of the mat and everything. Isn't that kind of, from a judge's point of view, take the saying that you're not really being creative?
I've entered a case all with 4 white mats. They were all done the same thing. It just depends. When you say creative ends to a point, but now you're at a point where you're doing a presentation. And so is it any different if you went to a mat cutter and had them cut 4 white mats, or you just save the template and put your images in the mat?
To me, a white mat says fine art. I mean, if you go into a gallery or a museum, if it's photography or some type of printing process, it's pretty much going to be on a white mat. So it used to be very taboo to use white mats, but I think the judges are finally coming around because it really does say fine art. And a white mat will work in a whole lot of cases. I've got a whole program on presentation, and that's part of it.
I would say it worked for Ansel Adams, Edward Weston, and John Sexton really well for a lot of years.
Amen.
But there's
They
a lot
did
of
very
judges.
well.
There's a lot of judges that hate white mat, no matter what it's
Yeah,
on.
well, are they as
I've heard
successful as
that
those
judges
3 were?
get spanked several times.
Good.
I mean, it's I don't know how it became such a bad thing to have a white mat, but I'm really glad that it's coming around. I've had several images that no matter what color I put on it or any tone that I put on it, it just didn't work. The only thing that works for me is a white mat, and sometimes that's just going to be the case. In to me, like I said, a white mat, it's clean, it's sterile, it's a presentation, it still frames the image, but it doesn't distract. Now, a white mat's not going to work for everything, but for a majority of the cases, it is.
How do you deal with the texture on a white mat? Because when it's white, you can't really add a texture to it.
Yeah, it has to have some tone to have a texture.
So you put a little bit of gray in it just to get a texture. Okay.
Yep. And I did this go round. I sealed 3 at district, and I put in a 4th that's very high key, and didn't want to put a stark white mat on it because I didn't want it to make my image look underexposed. And that's a whole other can of worms with white mats and black mats. You have to make sure that there are when you use a white mat, that it's not going to make your image appear to be dingy. Because if you put a stark white mat on something that doesn't really have a whole lot of bright whites, it's going to make your image look dingy. And the same with black. If you put a black mat, even if it's a low-key image, if you don't have any true blacks in that image, then it's going to make it look underexposed. It may not be underexposed, but the solid 0 black mat will make it appear as if it's underexposed. So if I'm doing that, then I'm not going to make it solid black. It'll look black, but it's not going to be completely black. But yeah, you've this particular 4th image that I'm throwing in cold to IPC. I gave it a little bit of tone and just a slightest bit of texture, and it I think I think it'll do okay. We'll see.
So I have maybe a silly question here. So you're putting these mats on a digital photo and making these mats digital, and then are you printing them this mat digitally and not actually using a real mat?
That is correct. We're not using real mats. Real mats, I mean, a lot of people do them, but there's such the chance that they'll get damaged. This is all digital. This would be flattened, and I will print the image just as you see it here.
And then frame it around it like it was a real mat?
No, this would just be a print mounted. There's no cut mat involved.
No, I understand that, but let's say that you have a frame. Would you put this printed digital mat inside of a frame?
Oh, you mean if it was not for competition?
Yes.
Yes, we frequently do that for fine art, for sale, and then also for portraits.
Huh. But if you had your choice, would you use a real mat if you were going to frame it, or would you still use this digital?
Generally not. I would do it just like this.
I've been using nothing but digital frames for I don't know, as long as I can remember. I mean, digital mats, not frames. I've been using nothing but digital. I have not had a cut mat in years and years, and they look perfect when you're framed. You can't tell the difference if they're done right.
We've actually had them in galleries and shows, and we've actually had people walk up, and it just kills me, but they walk up with their fingers and they rub their hand across because it has the illusion of a cut mat if you do it correctly. And we have it framed because we've had it, and we've watched people walk up and run their hands across it and try and figure out what it is. And I hate it when they touch my images like that, but we've actually seen it, haven't we, Sherry?
Yes.
Wow.
So I do the same thing with mats like Laura's talking about. I did a job in January and I delivered it, and so it's 16 by 20, it's mounted. I unpacked them and I literally reached down and touched it because it looked so real. And I made the stupid thing.
I've shown my clients them and said, here, touch this, and they're amazed. So yeah, they do look real. You don't need anything else.
Wow, that's incredible. So, and Sherry, do you usually use the double layer? I'm sure there's another name of it, but the dropped, the inside layer of the mat, or do you sometimes just use one mat? And as far as competition, do they like both or not?
Do you mean the cut mat versus just the keystroke?
No. The inside, the little inside one. Yeah, right there.
Right here?
Yeah. Do you always have two that dropped?
There's only one.
Well, no, I know, but it looks like two.
No, you're just seeing the bottom. It's a float mount. I mean, you could do it where the image is flush.
Yes.
Underneath.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yep. I like the float mat look. It just personal taste.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I like the float mounted look.
And what about judging for those that are judgers here?
This went lone, so we see this a lot in print competition. A lot of my images are like this. A lot of Dennis's images are like this, and we see it for tons of print competition images.
If it's done very well and you look at it, the technique, you give the person the score because it was done very well and it's very believable.
Right. Thanks so much, you guys.
You're welcome.
Well, interject on what Dwight just said. If we see somebody with too much texture and too much excessive matting, then sometimes I start looking to see what they're trying to distract me from or hide me from as a judge. So you know, that's why the simplicity really works, because it takes your eye right to the image instead of us wondering what you're trying to hide, what you're trying to do, especially with heavy textures or excessive matting techniques.
Something in your computer does not like that image.
I don't know what that is. And it happened when I zoomed out.
It's a feature of the new Photoshop.
Not that one.
This is not a new Photoshop. That is
Definitely not a new Photoshop. Any other questions out there? I know you've got them.
They'll ask as soon as you click it off.
Yeah, they always do. In that case, I will click off the recording now.